And we're back, like we never left. Welcome to the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I want to thank you all for spending some of your Tuesday morning here with me in New York. Once again, we're going to skip past all that promotional jazz and get right to the guts of the episode. Since the reaction was pretty strong to my discussion of the first Timothy Dalton James Bond film, The Living Daylights, I figured that might as well go to the well for the second time and discuss his, sadly, second and final turn as 007, summer 1989's License to Kill. Now, Living Daylights is my favorite James Bond film, and Timothy Dalton is far and away my favorite iteration of James Bond. My favorite cinematic incarnation of the character is in his two films. I don't think that I would have License to Kill as my second favorite James Bond film. I really like Casino Royale and very much enjoyed, oddly enough, Sean Connery's renegade Bond film, Never Say Never Again, which I think I've seen more than any Bond film with the exception of The Living Daylights. But it is unfortunate that Timothy Dalton only had two outings in the role. But that's the way it goes. Sometimes movies are just not released at precisely the right time, and they're perceived to be disappointments when simply they just weren't released at the right time. Or audiences weren't ready to embrace a darker interpretation of the 007 character that they already knew and loved for more than 25 years. So License to Kill is a story of revenge, which it's unlike any other James Bond film, certainly that had been made to that point. Now, you could argue that Daniel Craig's iteration of Bond is motivated by some kind of vengeance in at least one of the movies, whether it's Quantum of Solace, No Time to Die, or even to some extent Casino Royale. But the thing is, what Daniel Craig's tenure as Bond did, in my opinion, was it shined a light on just how good Timothy Dalton was. Even if some people were not altogether sold on the films, he was a fucking home run as 007. He brought a kind of a realism to the character. He could still be funny and charming and suave and debonair, but he could also be cold-blooded and lethal when he had to be. And the tone shifts, there really weren't any in either film. License to Kill just goes darker than we expect for a spy thriller, this kind of spy thriller. And even in the Connery films, as intense and brooding as Sir Sean could be, there was a much lighter touch. And it is something that I studied in film school, the way that movies are products of their time. And that can mean different things depending on what specifically you're talking about. But in particular, the Timothy Dalton era. The Living Daylights was originally earmarked for Roger Moore. A View to a Kill was not that good. They kind of wasted Christopher Walken. I mean, if you're going to have Christopher Walken that era as a villain, you got to do better, right? But Living Daylights was supposed to be Roger Moore, and then they kind of turned it into for Timothy Dalton. So they removed some of the more comedic bits, and they made Bond a one-woman guy. That is something that we had certainly not seen in any of the Connery or Roger Moore films, where it's just bed hopping, almost like go-go 60s sort of stuff, free love, Woodstock era. Everybody, let's get high and have as many bed partners as we can. But The Living Daylights was released at a time, the AIDS crisis. So Dalton's Bond only has one woman. I mean, if you want to count the pre-credits, but who the fuck knows what happens there? We don't actually know for sure that Bond and that woman, that random woman on a yacht, have sex. We don't know. But there is a romantic component that was not an accident, that Bond's relationship with the cellist, Cara Malloy, who originally he set up to bump her off before realizing something's rotten in the state of Denmark. This woman is not an assassin. She's a fucking cello player. She doesn't know one end of a rifle from the other. Whoever she was, I must have scared the living daylights out of her. Great way to get the title of the movie. They worked it in the first 15 minutes. But with a different Bond and a different approach to the Bond film, with a romantic element as opposed to a hot woman that Bond has sex with who just happens to be with him as the bullets are flying. But License to Kill was promoted in a different way because there's two Bond girls, basically. You can almost call them co-leads. Carrie Lowell's Pam Bouvier, who I think is an attaché for the U.S. government. Like, she's involved in the skullduggery. She's not just a random contractor. And Talisa Soto's Lupe Lamora, who is the girlfriend of the dastardly Franz Sanchez, the main villain, the big bad in this film, played by the always fire, and he's a real character on social media, Robert Davi. Now, Robert Davi, even if people of my generation, if they don't always know the name of certain performers, Robert Davi is a guy, we loved him in The Goonies with Joe Pantoliano, Joey Pants, and the late, great, Oscar-nominated Anne Ramsey, the other Fratellis in The Goonies. Davi is just one of those actors in that era who is so distinctive. He's a striking looking guy to begin with, and his line readings are always on point. Now, he made an impression in Die Hard. I'm Special Agent Johnson. This is Agent Johnson. No relation. Actually, the actor, the two Johnsons, now that I'm thinking about it, they're both in License to Kill. Special Agent Johnson, Agent Johnson. Robert Davi, and the other actor is Grand L. Bush. Grand L. Bush plays an American agent. I think he's supposed to be CIA. He could be FBI. Who kind of commandeers James Bond at a critical moment in License to Kill. It's funny, I didn't think of that until just now. But Robert Davi's Franz Sanchez, he does not have the normal aspirations of the typical Bond villain. This is not Ernesto Blofeld trying to take over the world, or Auric Goldfinger trying to control the world's financial markets for world domination, and there's no Armageddon. Franz Sanchez simply wants to keep making millions of dollars selling drugs and killing your kids, quite frankly. And he's not really the best boyfriend, because if his girl so much as looks at another guy, what did he promise you? His heart? Give it his heart. Great stuff. Davi is just marvelous in the role. A realistic villain. He just wants to keep dealing drugs and running an illegal casino. Well, not if James Bond has anything to say about it. And I also want to point out two of the other supporting performers in this film. A very young Benicio del Toro plays one of Sanchez's guys. And I didn't know who Benicio del Toro was, but he makes such an impression because he looks like a model. I'm sorry, he looks like a male model, an Abercrombie and Fitch looking guy. And the smile and the snarl and the sneer, he is incredible in this role. He's a guy you could see was going places. No way around it. You can't do what he does in this movie without having a talent behind you. He right away shows more than just a pretty face, so to speak. The other supporting performer that I absolutely adore, Wayne Newton. Wayne Newton, I call him an actor, he's a singer. Wayne Newton is Mr. Vegas. I think he holds the record for most shows in the history of the city. Would he work at the Hilton? He worked at the Grand Dankeschön. Oh, Dankeschön. That's Wayne Newton. Wayne Newton, the following year, opposite Andrew Dice Clay in a movie that I fucking love, even though it sucks. It's a guilty pleasure movie. I'm going to have to talk about it at some point. Wayne Newton plays the villain in that film. Oddly enough, he's a corrupt music industry executive named Julian Grendel, who kind of runs afoul, or maybe Andrew Dice Clay's Ford Fairlane runs afoul of Julian Grendel. And Wayne Newton is a fucking scream in that movie and also in License to Kill. And License to Kill is not really funny, but every moment with Wayne Newton, when you realize what his character is in place for, he's fucking hysterical. It's almost just like, all right, he's in there to get a few laughs. He does it really, really well. But the two Bond girls, and this is something when the film was being promoted, License to Kill, much was made of the fact that the women are, they're gorgeous, they're really hot and all that, but they're not in the story for set decorative purposes. They are critical to the unfolding of the plot. And Carrie Lowell's Pam Bouvier, she's a badass. She has a lot of skills. She is not just a Bond girl. There are moments where she's actually driving the story, and she bails Bond out of trouble on a couple of occasions. It's kind of a quid pro quo. They help each other out. But she is not just a Bond girl. She has a lot to do. And Talisa Soto's Lupe Lamora ends up having more than we think. She's more clever than she first appears. And yeah, she wants James Bond for herself, but she also knows how to play the game. For just a girlfriend, she knows how to play politics. She's pretty fucking smart. And so a lot was made of the fact that, and again, we have, without it being spoken, the AIDS crisis represented in The Living Daylights, and then in License to Kill, you have two very forceful, strong women and solid actresses. I think Carrie Lowell is great in this role as Pam Bouvier in this film. And it was something the movie did. They took a risk, and I feel like they succeeded because both actresses were up to the task. And Timothy Dalton, to his credit, did not wrestle screen time away. He allowed the women their moments to shine. There's a great moment towards the end where Bond is beaten to shit. He looks like hell. Even Timothy Dalton, a very attractive man, guy literally looks like this guy is fucking dying here. She goes, "What are you waiting for? Get in." It's such an emasculating moment that James Bond, Timothy Dalton, with a little wry smile, goes, "Yes, sir." It's a classic moment. "Yes, sir." And she even kind of giggles at him. She gets the joke. So the thing is, with License to Kill, the idea is that the film was a box office disappointment. It did not do nearly as well at the worldwide box office as The Living Daylights 2 years prior, 2 summers prior. July 1987 was The Living Daylights, released the same day as The Lost Boys. Thou shalt not fall. Yep. But License to Kill did not do as well at the box office as its predecessor, although it was a hit. It made 5 times its production cost. It got really good reviews, but I reject contemporary wisdom at the time and people Monday morning quarterbacking all these years later, saying stuff like Dalton was wrong for the role. Bullshit. Fans weren't willing to embrace a darker Bond. Also bullshit. I think it was just a matter of circumstance, which is what I mentioned at the opening of this episode. The summer of 1989 was so overloaded and jam-packed with blockbusters and wannabe blockbusters. I think License to Kill succeeded just making $162 million. Time value of money, inflation. Think about how much 162 plus million in 1989 is today. It's a lot of fucking money. Way more than that. Probably 400 million, if not more. This movie was not a box office bomb. It underperformed. But think of the other movies released that were huge hits. Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, the third of Steven Spielberg's Holy Trilogy, the one with Sir Sean Connery as Indy's dad. Dollar for dollar, the biggest gross in that entire series. In 1989 dollars, it outgrossed Crystal Skull from 2008. It outgrossed Dial of Destiny. Forget inflation adjusted. That's how big a hit that movie was. I don't think that audiences of the day had such exquisite and varied tastes that, well, we would have seen License to Kill, but we hear it's a dark film. We're going to go to see Last Crusade. That's bullshit. It's the same audience. Lethal Weapon 2, terrific sequel. I think it's almost as good as the original Lethal Weapon. It was in theaters at the same time. Those films were both in theaters at the same time as License to Kill. If you hadn't seen Lethal Weapon 2 yet, you probably went to see that before a Bond film, but you would have done that anyway. 1989, also the summer of Tim Burton's Batman, which was still tearing it up when License to Kill landed. Ghostbusters 2, not that good. Made a lot of money. Big movies. Karate Kid 3, piece of crap. But that was in theaters. Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, huge hit. Parenthood, also with Rick Moranis, huge hit. There were just too many big films out at the same time. You only have a certain amount of time or a certain amount of entertainment dollar that you're going to go to the movies with. I don't think for 1 millisecond it had anything to do with, people just weren't ready for this sort of, no. People just don't have unlimited funds and unlimited time to go to the movies over and over and over and over and over. Summer of '89 was a crazy movie summer. Star Trek V, The Final Frontier was also in theaters. Not that good. Weird Al Yankovic's UHF. Rob Reiner's When Harry Met Sally. I'll have what she's having. I could probably name a few more big movies, but you understand, there were just too many big hitters that were out at the same time. License to Kill was very successful to make as much money domestic as it did, given the movies I mentioned, and I probably forgot a couple of big hitters from 1989. It was an incredible movie summer. So we know that James Bond, as presented in the Connery films and to a lesser extent the Roger Moore films, which are way more tongue-in-cheek and light, when James Bond wants to kill somebody, he can do it. Hell, when we meet him in The Living Daylights, he's getting ready to bump off what turns out to be his leading lady, Cara Malova. He thinks she's an assassin, and his bullshit detector goes off. She's not an assassin. The girl didn't know one end of a rifle from the other. But I must have scared the living daylights out of her. Great. We know he can kill people when he wants to. He's set up to kill General Pushkin in The Living Daylights, the Jean Rhys Davies character. Fantastic. But Franz Sanchez is under 24/7 protection. He's not just going to be able to walk up to the guy and put one in his liver. He's not going to be able to do it. And Bond's buddy, Felix Leiter, the CIA operative who has, if he hasn't been a friend, he's been a close working associate for decades. Even though this is only Dalton's second film, he still has the history of the James Bond character. They even mentioned that he had been married once. That is a reference to the George Lazenby Bond of On Her Majesty's Secret Service, who married Diana Riggs Tracy. So we know, based on the horrendous shit that has happened to Felix Leiter in the world of this movie, Bond wants revenge. He's going to get it one way or the other. But he can't just assassinate the guy. There's no process by which he can do that. So he has to rely on every bit of cunning. The help of Q, Desmond Llewellyn, always great as Q, and the two leading ladies. How can he get close enough to Franz Sanchez to kill the son of a bitch? And as far as I know, this is the only Bond film where Bond's endgame was murder. Well, man's got to do what a man's got to do. And you look at the Daniel Craig era, he has moments where it feels like he's making things very, very personal. Well, with Bond, the attack on Leiter, the attack on Leiter's bride, this is not going to stand. And there are moments in the Connery films especially where he is clearly not okay with the orders with which he's been given. But warts and all, and kicking and screaming, he attempts to discharge his duties to the best of his ability. But in this film, when the shit goes down and Felix is badly injured, Bond just refuses to walk away. Even though M tells him, Desmond Llewellyn, another great actor, as M, 007, you have an assignment. It's up to the Americans to sort this out. This is not your problem, and it sure as fuck isn't the problem of Her Majesty's government. You have an assignment. I expect you to carry it out. Bond basically, and Dalton is believable, Roger Moore would not have been able to do this. It wouldn't have worked. But Dalton all but says, fuck you, and you, and you, and you, and every one of you. Because I'm not turning my back on this guy. He saved my neck. How many times? The Americans are not going to do anything. I got to make this right. Well, after a certain point, as much as they would like to capture 007, when he manages to escape, well, they got to just let him go. And whatever happens, they'll disavow, well, we had nothing to do with it. We had a problem with this guy ourselves. So he goes off to try to carry out a large-scale assassination of a notorious drug lord. This would be like somebody trying to ping Pablo Escobar, however many years ago. Easier said than done. And Dalton's performance in this movie, I think, is as good. It's different. It's pitched at a different angle than The Living Daylights. Living Daylights, Bond has moments where he gets angry. He doesn't like the fact that one of the people he's working with gets bumped off. Unacceptable. But that is critical to the story because it nearly leads him to assassinate Pushkin, the John Rhys-Davies character. Man, John Rhys-Davies, what a great, great actor he is, man. He is just awesome. Great in Raiders of the Lost Ark and fantastic as Pushkin in The Living Daylights. The License to Kill is a dirtier, grittier, it might be the dirtiest and grittiest of all the Bond films, including the Daniel Craig movies. Because as much really nasty stuff as happens to Daniel Craig, there's still to me a bit of a veneer of beauty in the images. And License to Kill is not afraid to really roll around in the muck and show just how far this 007 is going to go to right this wrong. And as I say, I really like what Robert Davi does because there are moments, and the thing is, he's not simply an unfeeling, unthinking drug lord who will kill anyone and everyone. There are plenty of movies, we've all seen these movies, where you have a villain who is set up as having some kind of moral center or moral code in between just maiming and murdering. And they seem to be setting Sanchez up as somebody like that, but it turns out he actually does. When he talks about loyalty, he's not exaggerating. So there is an American agent that he ends up, the character of Sanchez, making a deal with. And the people around him say, we don't really need an American agent walking around here. I think that you should just ice this guy. And Davi, with that little smile, says, I made a deal with this person. People know me as a man of my word. And I don't need to kill this guy. I made a deal. I'm following through. What he's saying is, not that he has any kind of moral imperative that he's a good guy, but he wants people to at least feel as if they can level with him and that maybe there is a deal that can be struck here. He's not just going to bump you off after making a deal. He wants the world to know. You don't have to capture me if you don't want to. I will pay you handsomely if we can make a deal. And I'm being serious. I am not simply going to turn a gun on you unless you fuck with me, unless you steal from me, unless you try to hook up with my girl, then all bets are off. And the character of Sanchez in the world of this story works. And it is in large part due to how talented of a performer Robert Davi is, that he even shows the guy to have a human side after, well, he doesn't realize Bond has attempted to assassinate him and failed, and both guys could have been killed. The way that he almost gently handles 007 after this attempted assassination, it's really good because he's cagey. You don't know, how much does he really know about Bond? Well, he doesn't know enough, unfortunately for him. And there are a lot of big action sequences, and a lot was made at the time that Dalton did a couple of stunts that nowadays would be no big deal. Tom Cruise would be all over it. But back then, there were a few stunts. There was one underwater stunt in particular, which the studio did not want Dalton to do. And Dalton basically said, I don't really care. I'm doing it, whether you like it or not. Try to keep me out of the water. It's not going to work with a stuntman. So he does an underwater stunt. And you can clearly see that it's him. And the special effects, there's no computer work, but the effects as far as shit blowing up real good, and where you're saying, how did they shoot this and keep Dalton and Carrie Lowell out of harm's way? How did they not get injured here? Very, very believable. And we've seen movies where it doesn't look real, where you can clearly see, okay, there's a stuntman here. The work here is seamless. It is unfortunate, as a fan of Timothy Dalton and his work in his two films, that he did not at least get one more outing. I have no axe to grind. I love Pierce Brosnan. I don't think that Pierce Brosnan It's not that he wasn't a good Bond. I don't think, except for GoldenEye, the stories were worthy of the James Bond treatment. I just don't think they were that interesting. I saw Tomorrow Never Dies in theaters. Wasn't good. GoldenEye I enjoyed. I would give GoldenEye 3 stars out of 4. It's at least a worthy entry into the James Bond filmography. But when it was announced, I guess it was about 92 or 93, that Dalton was resigning the role and it was going to be Pierce, I was upset. I wish that he had one more. I would have liked to have seen GoldenEye in like 1992 or 93, and then you could give the role to Pierce. Then Pierce maybe take a crack at Tomorrow Never Dies or World Is Not Enough, or tomorrow. What was the other one? Die Another Day. Just not that good. But Timothy Dalton, though, is great in both films, and he's just a fucking home run hitter. What a terrific actor. We love him in Beautician and the Beast. Talk about showing the range that he could play this brutish Eastern European dictator, Boris Pachenko. Even his name, what a great name. But matching the energy of the nanny herself, Fran Drescher, and I think he's funnier than her in that movie. It's his performance that makes it memorable. So License to Kill, an underappreciated, not so much underrated. As I say, the Rotten Tomatoes score is very solid. 80% is a good score. But an underappreciated gem, a dark masterpiece in the James Bond world, the James Bond cinematic universe. I have it certainly in my top 5. I think I would probably have it 5th. I definitely have it below Never Say Never Again and below Casino Royale. I really love what Daniel Craig does in his first outing. Not so much the other ones, but that one in particular. I think he is fantastic. And you can Google right now how many critics and how many big fans of the James Bond series, they say Daniel Craig, Timothy Dalton, the closest cinematic representations of the way Bond is described in those novels. In most cases, that's what you'll read. There will be some who say, well, not really. Bond looked more like George Lazenby, for example. Somebody pointed out to me. I never read the novels. So in this case, I am going off of just what I have read from a secondhand perspective, people describing Ian Fleming's, the way that he kind of narrates the action and the visuals that we get of what James Bond looks like. I mean, it's not so easy to do, but to give you an example, when John Grisham wrote The Firm, if you read it and somebody had said, what do you think about Tom Cruise? You can easily see that. He doesn't describe him as if he's Tom Cruise, but the idea is there are certain ways that authors describe characters where boop, a big actor of the day pops into mind and you say, that's him. Steven Spielberg said when he read The Bridges of Madison County, as soon as Robert Kincaid makes an appearance, within a half a page, Spielberg, the light bulb went off and said, this is Clint Eastwood. It's like they're describing my guy, my buddy, the man from El Paso. And a lot of people have said that Timothy Dalton is the closest representation of the way that Ian Fleming described 007, James Bond. This has been episode 283 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I want to thank you all for spending some of your Tuesday morning here with me in New York. If you check out this episode on the YouTube channel, haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, share, turn on those notifications. Or if you catch this episode on the audio platforms such as Spotify, iTunes, Podbean, Amazon Music, or any of the others in which we're hosted, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, share, and turn on those notifications. I'll be back with a new episode real soon. Till then, peace.